The sun beat down mercilessly on Prairie Rose, Montana, as Eleanor Porter wiped sweat from her brow, the weight of her father's failing cattle ranch heavy on her shoulders. The whispers and sidelong glances from the townspeople burned worse than the summer heat. A woman couldn't save a ranch, they said. A woman couldn't do a man's job, they insisted. But Eleanor had made a promise to her dying father, and she intended to keep it, even if it meant fighting the whole territory to prove herself worthy. Eleanor tightened the cinch on her saddle, ignoring the ache in her muscles from the previous day's work. Her chestnut mare, Penny, snorted impatiently, eager to begin their morning ride to check the north pasture fence line. The ranch hands had all but abandoned the Porter spread after her father's passing 3 months ago, leaving her with just old Henry, the cook, and young Joey, a 14-year-old stable boy who couldn't afford to be picky about his employer. "Miss Porter, Miss Porter." Joey's voice carried across the yard as Eleanor prepared to mount. The boy was running full tilt toward her, his face flushed with excitement. "What is it, Joey? Is something wrong?" Eleanor asked, immediately concerned. "No, madam," Joey panted, skidding to a halt. "It's just there's a stranger at the gate. Says he heard we might be hiring." Eleanor's heart quickened. Help was exactly what she needed, but good help was hard to come by, especially for a woman running a ranch. Men in these parts didn't take kindly to taking orders from a woman, and those willing usually had other intentions that made her skin crawl. "Tell him I'll be right there," she said, adjusting her hat against the morning sun. The man waiting at the gate sat tall in his saddle atop a magnificent black stallion. His broad shoulders and weathered hat spoke of years on the range, while the quiet confidence in his posture suggested he knew his worth. As Eleanor approached, his eyes blue as a mountain lake assessed her with neither judgment nor presumption, something rare in her experience since taking over the ranch. "Good morning," she called, bringing Penny to a stop a respectable distance away. "Madam," he replied, removing his hat in a gesture of respect. "Name's Matthew Tucker. Heard you might be looking for experienced hands." Eleanor studied him carefully. "Where'd you hear that?" A slight smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Word travels. Ranch this size running with just you, an old cook, and a boy folks talk." "And what exactly are they saying, Mr. Tucker?" she asked, her tone sharpening. "That the Porter spread is dying," he replied bluntly. "That John Porter's daughter is stubborn as a mule but can't possibly save what her daddy built." Eleanor's jaw tightened. "And you've come to watch it fail?" Matthew Tucker shook his head, replacing his hat. "No, madam. I've come because a good ranch deserves a fighting chance, and from what I can see, you're fighting harder than most men would." His words caught her off guard. For months, all she'd heard were predictions of her failure, thinly veiled suggestions to sell before things got worse, and not so subtle hints that she should find herself a husband to take over the burden. "I need someone who can work cattle, mend fences, and follow orders without questioning my every decision because I'm a woman," Eleanor stated firmly. "I can do all that," Matthew replied without hesitation. "Been working cattle since I could walk." As for taking orders from a woman, his blue eyes held hers steadily. "I reckon the person giving the orders matters less than whether those orders make sense. And if you've kept this place running at all these past months, I suspect yours do." Eleanor wasn't entirely convinced, but she was desperate. The spring cattle drive was approaching, and without help, she'd never get her beeves to market. $30 a month plus room and board, she offered, expecting him to balk at the modest sum. "Fair enough," he said with a nod. "When do I start?" "Right now," Eleanor replied, turning Penny toward the north pasture. "We've got fence to mend before sundown." Matthew fell in beside her, and as they rode, Eleanor couldn't help but notice how easily he sat his horse, how his eyes constantly scanned the horizon, the cattle, the lay of the land. He had the look of a man who'd seen his share of trouble but had come out the other side wiser for it. "You've been ranching long?" she asked, breaking the silence. "All my life," he answered. My pa had a spread in Wyoming, lost it in '76 to a hard winter and harder bankers. I'm sorry to hear that. Life happens, Matthew said simply. Worked for the Circle T in Colorado after that. Then the double R in Nebraska. Been drifting since, taking work where I can find it. And what brings you to Montana? Eleanor asked, curious about the man who'd appeared when she needed help most. Matthew's gaze swept across the rolling grassland that stretched to the distant mountains. Big sky. Open country. Heard Montana was a place where a man could still make something of himself. Or a woman, Eleanor challenged, unable to help herself. His eyes found hers, and the corner of his mouth lifted in a half-smile that made her heart skip despite herself. Especially a woman, if she's determined enough. They reached the broken section of fence by mid-morning. Several posts had rotted at the base, allowing a section to collapse. Without a word, Matthew dismounted and began unloading tools from his saddle bags, as if he'd been working for her for years instead of hours. Eleanor watched him for a moment, then dismounted and grabbed a pair of work gloves from her saddlebag. When she approached to help, Matthew paused but made no comment about the work being unsuitable for her. Instead, he simply nodded toward the fallen posts. "If you'll hold them steady, I'll drive them in," he suggested. They worked side by side under the punishing sun, speaking little but accomplishing much. By late afternoon, Eleanor's muscles were screaming in protest, but the fence stood solid once more. As they packed up their tools, she noticed Matthew watching her with something like respect in his eyes. "Most ranchers I've known would have called it quits hours ago," he remarked. "Most ranchers haven't had to prove themselves worthy of their inheritance every single day," she replied, then immediately regretted the bitterness in her tone. "No," Matthew agreed quietly. "I suppose they haven't." The next few weeks fell into a rhythm. Each morning, Eleanor would lay out the day's work, and Matthew would accomplish it without complaint or question. He fixed the sagging roof on the barn, rounded up stray cattle that had wandered onto neighboring land, and even helped Henry repair the ancient cookstove when it began belching smoke into the kitchen. Word spread quickly through Prairie Rose that Eleanor Porter had hired a drifter to help save her ranch. The gossip evolved daily, from speculation that she was desperate and foolish to rumors that Matthew Tucker was actually an outlaw hiding from the law. Eleanor did her best to ignore the talk, but it was Judge Simmons' comments at the general store that finally broke her composure. "Miss Porter," the judge had said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "I do hope you've considered my offer for your land. A woman alone can't run a ranch, and hiring some saddle tramp won't change that. They say he's handy with a gun, probably has a price on his head somewhere. You'll never be enough to save your father's legacy, my dear." Eleanor had abandoned her shopping and fled, humiliation burning her cheeks. She'd ridden hard back to the ranch, seeking solitude, only to find Matthew repairing a wagon wheel in the yard. One look at her face told him something was wrong. "Miss Porter," he asked, setting down his tools. "It's nothing," she insisted, dismounting quickly and turning toward the house. "Doesn't look like nothing," he observed, falling into step beside her. "Town giving you trouble again?" Eleanor stopped abruptly, turning to face him. "Why did you really come here, Mr. Tucker? There are plenty of ranches that would hire an experienced hand. Why choose one run by a woman everyone says is doomed to fail?" Matthew considered her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Because everyone being so sure you'll fail made me think you might be worth believing in." His words knocked the wind from her lungs more effectively than any fall from a horse. For a moment, she simply stared at him, trying to discern any hint of mockery or deception in his eyes. She found none. "They said I'd never be enough," she whispered, the weight of months of doubt suddenly too heavy to bear alone. Matthew's gaze never wavered. "Then they've never met you," he said simply. Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition, perhaps, or the beginning of trust. Eleanor found herself telling him about Judge Simmons' repeated attempts to buy her land for far less than it was worth, about the bank's reluctance to extend the loan her father had always easily secured, about the cattle buyers who tried to cheat her, because they thought a woman wouldn't know the fair market price. Matthew listened without interruption, his jaw tightening with each new injustice she described. When she finished, he nodded once, decisively. "Well then," he said, "we'd better make sure this spring's drive is successful enough to silence them all." Eleanor asked, surprised by how much she wanted his answer to mean what she thought it did. "Unless you'd prefer I move on," Matthew replied, suddenly uncertain. "No," she said quickly. "I wouldn't prefer that at all." The following weeks were a flurry of activity as they prepared for the spring cattle drive to the railhead in Miles City. Matthew proved himself invaluable, not only with his own skills, but in helping Eleanor recruit additional hands for the drive. He found 3 experienced cowboys willing to work for her Jim Ralston, a taciturn older man with a gray streaked beard, brothers Liam and Thomas Burke, Irish immigrants with quick smiles and quicker hands on a rope. The night before they were set to begin the drive, Eleanor sat on the porch steps, anxiety keeping her from sleep. The soft creak of the door announced Matthew's presence before he settled beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cool night air. "Can't sleep?" he asked, offering her a cup of coffee. Eleanor accepted gratefully. "Too much riding on this drive." "The cattle look good," Matthew assured her, "strong and fat. You'll get top dollar if the market holds." "If," Eleanor repeated. "And if we make it there without losing half the herd to rustlers or stampede or any of the 1,000 things that could go wrong." Matthew's shoulder brushed hers as he leaned back against the step behind them. "That's ranching. Same risks your father took every year." "But when he failed, people didn't say it was because he was a man," Eleanor pointed out. "They just called it bad luck." "True enough," Matthew admitted, "but you're not going to fail." "How can you be so sure?" In the silver moonlight, his profile was strong and certain. "Because I've watched you these past weeks. You've got more grit than most men I've known and a head for business your father would have been proud of. The cattle are healthy, the men are loyal, and the weather looks favorable." His confidence warmed her more than the coffee. They sat in companionable silence, watching stars wheel overhead until Eleanor found herself stifling a yawn. "You should get some rest," Matthew said gently. "Long day tomorrow." "You too," she replied, reluctant to end their quiet moment together. As she rose to go inside, Matthew caught her hand lightly. The touch sent a jolt through her that had nothing to do with surprise. "Eleanor," he said, using her given name for the first time. "Whatever happens on this drive, you've already proven them wrong, remember that." She nodded, unable to speak past the sudden tightness in her throat, and slipped inside. That night, for the first time since her father's death, Eleanor slept soundly. Dawn broke clear and cool as they began the drive. 300 head of cattle stretched across the valley floor, moving at a steady pace under the watchful eyes of Eleanor, Matthew, and the 3 hired hands. Joey had begged to come along, and Eleanor had relented, giving him the job of wrangling their spare horses. The first 3 days passed without incident. The cattle moved well, the men worked smoothly together, and the weather remained ideal. On the 4th night, as they made camp near a creek, Eleanor felt herself beginning to hope that maybe, just maybe, luck was on her side. She was checking on the remuda when Matthew found her, his face grim in the fading light. "Riders," he said quietly. "Jim spotted them following our dust about 2 miles back. 4, maybe 5 men." Eleanor's stomach knotted. "Rustlers? Could just be travelers headed the same way. But they're keeping their distance, which makes me suspicious." "What do we do?" Matthew's hand moved instinctively to the revolver at his hip. "Double the night watch. Keep the herd close. If they're just passing through, they'll move on. If not." He left the thought unfinished. That night, Eleanor insisted on taking a watch shift despite the men's protests. She sat her horse at the edge of the bedded-down herd, rifle across her lap, straining to see into the darkness beyond their camp. The moon was a thin crescent, offering little light. A soft nickering from her horse alerted her first, then she heard the muffled thud of hooves approaching slowly from the west. Eleanor's mouth went dry. She reached for her rifle just as a voice called out from behind her. "Don't move, miss." Eleanor froze, her hand inches from the weapon. "Now, nice and slow, raise those hands where I can see them." She complied, turning her head slightly to see a man on horseback, revolver trained on her. In the dim light, she could make out little more than his silhouette. "What do you want?" she asked, proud that her voice remained steady. "Just your cattle, madam," the man replied, almost apologetically. "My boys are already cutting out the best of the herd. You just sit quiet and nobody needs to get hurt." Anger flared in Eleanor's chest, burning away her fear. "Those are my cattle, I won't let you take them." The man chuckled. "No offense, but you're not exactly in a position to stop us." "She might not be," came Matthew's voice from the darkness to their right, "but I am." The rustler turned sharply, but before he could bring his gun to bear, Matthew fired. The shot echoed across the valley, and the man tumbled from his saddle with a cry of pain. Chaos erupted. The cattle, startled by the gunshot, began to rise, lowing nervously. Shouts came from the far side of the herd as the other rustlers realized their companion was down. More shots rang out and Eleanor ducked low over her horse's neck, spurring the animal toward the camp where the other men would be grabbing weapons. She nearly collided with Liam and Thomas, both armed and running toward the commotion. "Rustlers?" she called out. 4 or 5 of them. Matthews engaged them on the west side. The brothers split up, circling wide to flank the attackers. Eleanor dismounted, grabbed her rifle from its scabbard and crouched behind a wagon wheel, trying to make sense of the shadowy figures moving among the increasingly restless cattle. A shot whizzed past her, splintering the wood of the wagon. Eleanor returned fire, aiming at the muzzle flash. She heard a grunt and knew she'd hit someone, though whether it was fatal or just a graze, she couldn't tell. The cattle were fully spooked now, beginning to move en masse. The ground trembled beneath her as the herd started to run, driven by fear and confusion. "Stampede," Jim's voice carried over the thunder of hooves. "Head him off," Eleanor ran for her horse, knowing that if they lost the herd now, they'd never recover them all. As she swung into the saddle, she caught sight of Matthew racing alongside the lead steers, trying to turn them before they scattered completely. Without hesitation, she dug in her heels and followed, leaving the rustlers and the gunfight behind. The night air whipped at her face as she pushed her horse to its limits, drawing alongside the panicked cattle. Ahead, she could see Matthew waving his hat, shouting as he tried to turn the leaders back on themselves. Eleanor mirrored his actions on the opposite flank, her heart pounding in time with her horse's hooves. Gradually, miraculously, the lead steers began to turn, creating a milling circle rather than a straight-line stampede. Other cattle followed, and soon the herd was moving in a giant, living wheel that slowly lost momentum. By the time the cattle settled, dawn was breaking over the eastern horizon. Eleanor's horse stood heaving beneath her, sweat-soaked and exhausted. She was searching the herd for Matthew when she heard her name called. She turned to see him riding toward her, hat gone, shirt torn, a streak of blood across one cheek. Relief flooded through her, so intense it made her dizzy. "The rustlers?" she asked as he drew alongside. "2 dead, 2 fled," Matthew reported grimly. "Jim took a bullet in the arm, but he'll be all right. We lost maybe 20 head in the stampede, but the rest are accounted for." Eleanor sagged in her saddle. "Thank God you were there." Matthew's expression softened. "We were all there." "You stood your ground, Eleanor, shot one of them yourself, from what Liam says." "I did what needed doing," she said simply. His smile then was like sunrise. "That's what I admire about you." The remainder of the drive passed without further incident. When they reached Miles City, the cattle buyer, who clearly expected to take advantage of a woman rancher, found himself facing not only Eleanor but Matthew and 3 loyal cowboys who stood firmly behind her as she negotiated. The price she secured was better than her father had managed the previous year. As they rode back to the ranch, money safely deposited in the Miles City Bank with a draft to the Prairie Rose Bank, Eleanor felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She'd done it proved she could run the ranch, drive cattle to market, and turn a profit. The only shadow on her success was the knowledge that Matthew, having completed the job he was hired for, might move on. The thought of him leaving tied her stomach in knots. Somewhere between that first day at the fence line and the night of the rustler attack, Matthew Tucker had become essential to her in ways that went far beyond his skills as a ranch hand. They reached Porter Ranch on a golden afternoon in late June. Joey came running from the house, whooping with excitement at their return. Henry hobbled out more slowly, a rare smile on his weathered face. "Welcome home, Miss Eleanor," the old cook called. "Dinner's almost ready." Home, the word had never sounded sweeter. That evening, after the men had been paid and a celebratory meal consumed, Eleanor found herself once more on the porch steps, watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. The soft thud of boots announced Matthew's approach. "Beautiful evening," he commented, settling beside her. "It is," she agreed, gathering her courage. "Matthew, I wanted to thank you for everything. The drive wouldn't have succeeded without you." He shook his head. "You give me too much credit. This was your victory, Eleanor." "Perhaps," she conceded, "but I'd like to think we achieved it together." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the distant lowing of cattle and the evening song of meadowlarks. Eleanor's heart pounded as she prepared to ask the question she'd been dreading. "Will you be moving on now?" she finally managed, keeping her voice casual with effort. Matthew turned to look at her fully, his blue eyes serious in the fading light. "Do you want me to?" "No," Eleanor admitted softly. "I'd like you to stay." As your ranch hand, the question hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Eleanor took a deep breath and decided to risk everything. "I was hoping," she said carefully, "that you might consider a more permanent arrangement." Matthew's eyebrows rose. "Are you offering me a partnership, Miss Porter?" "I'm offering you whatever you're willing to accept," she answered honestly. "The ranch needs you. She hesitated, then continued bravely, "I need you." Matthew reached for her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "I've been thinking about my future," he said, his voice low. "About what I want and where I belong." Eleanor's heart sank. He was leaving after all. "And I've realized," Matthew continued, "that for the first time since I lost my father's ranch, I've found a place that feels like home." His thumb traced gentle circles on her palm. "But it's not the land or the cattle or the big Montana sky that makes it feel that way." Hope blossomed in Eleanor's chest as she met his gaze. "What is it then?" "It's you, Eleanor," he said simply. "Your courage, your determination, the way you care for this land and everyone on it. I've never met anyone like you, and I don't want to leave. Not now. Not ever." Eleanor couldn't speak past the sudden lump in her throat. Instead, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, pouring into the kiss all the feelings she couldn't yet put into words. Matthew's arm slipped around her waist, drawing her closer as he returned the kiss with equal fervor. When they finally parted, both breathless, Matthew rested his forehead against hers. "I take it that means you want me to stay," he murmured, a smile in his voice. Eleanor laughed softly. "Very much so." "Good," he replied. "Because I'm not going anywhere. This ranch needs both of us, and I reckon we need each other." "They said I'd never be enough," Eleanor whispered, thinking of all the doubters in Prairie Rose. Matthew's fingers gently tilted her chin up, his eyes holding hers with absolute certainty. "Then they've never met you," he said. "And they certainly never saw us together." The following spring found the Porter Ranch, now officially the Porter and Tucker Ranch, thriving beyond anyone's expectations. The winter had been mild, allowing the cattle to maintain good weight, and calving season had yielded a bumper crop of healthy new stock. Eleanor and Matthew had married in a small ceremony attended by their ranch hands, Henry, Joey, and a few surprised but genuinely pleased townspeople who had witnessed their success. Judge Simmons had not been among them. The man who had so confidently predicted Eleanor's failure now avoided both her and Matthew whenever possible, especially after they'd purchased the adjacent property he'd been trying to acquire for years. On a warm May morning, Eleanor stood on the porch of the ranch house, their home, watching as Matthew worked with a spirited young horse in the corral. His patience and quiet strength with the animal mirrored how he'd been with her, believing in her capabilities even when she doubted herself, supporting without controlling, partnering in the truest sense of the word. She placed a hand on her still flat stomach, smiling at the secret she would share with him that evening. Their family would be growing by winter, adding another chapter to the story that had begun when a determined woman refused to surrender her dream and a drifting cowboy decided to believe in her. As if sensing her gaze, Matthew looked up from the corral. The smile that spread across his face at the sight of her still made her heart skip even after months of marriage. He waved, and she waved back, content in the knowledge that together they were more than enough. They were everything. That evening, after the day's work was done, they sat together on the porch swing Matthew had built as a wedding gift. The setting sun bathed the ranch in golden light as Eleanor leaned into her husband's embrace. "I have news," she said, unable to contain her excitement any longer. Matthew looked down at her, curiosity in his eyes. "Good news, I hope." Eleanor took his hand and placed it gently over her abdomen. "The best news," she whispered. "We're going to have a baby." Matthew's expression transformed from confusion to wonder to joy in the space of a heartbeat. "A baby." He repeated, voice thick with emotion. "You're sure?" Eleanor nodded, tears of happiness threatening to spill. "Dr. Miller confirmed it yesterday when I was in town." Matthew pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "A family," he murmured against her hair. "Our family." "Are you happy?" Eleanor asked, though his reaction left little doubt. Matthew drew back to look into her eyes, his own suspiciously bright. "Happier than I've ever been," he assured her. "I never thought I'd find this a home, a wife I adore, a child on the way. You've given me everything, Eleanor." "We've given each other everything," she corrected gently. "This ranch, this life, it's what we've built together." Matthew's hand returned to rest protectively over their unborn child. "And now we're building more." They sat in comfortable silence as twilight deepened around them, both contemplating the future stretching before them, a future neither had dared imagine before finding each other. "What do you think?" Matthew asked after a while. "Boy or girl?" Eleanor smiled. "I don't know. Either way, they'll grow up knowing they can be anything, do anything they set their mind to." "Just like their mother," Matthew said with pride. "And they'll have your heart," Eleanor added softly, "your kindness and your strength." Matthew kissed her temple. "Poor child won't stand a chance with our combined stubbornness." Eleanor laughed. "True enough." As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Eleanor thought about how far they'd come, how far she'd come since that day Matthew Tucker had ridden up to her gate. From a woman desperately trying to prove herself to a confident rancher, wife, and soon-to-be mother. The voices that had once told her she'd never be enough had been silenced, replaced by the steady support of the man beside her and the growing respect of the community. "I love you, Matthew Tucker," she said, the words simple but profound in the quiet evening. "And I love you, Eleanor Tucker," he replied, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "More than I ever thought possible." The ranch spread out before them, peaceful in the gathering dusk. Cattle grazed in distant pastures, horses nickered softly in the barn, and somewhere an owl called to welcome the night. This was their kingdom, hard-won and precious. And soon, it would welcome a new heir, a child who would grow up knowing that with love, determination, and faith in each other, anything was possible. "What shall we name the baby?" Eleanor mused, her head resting comfortably on Matthew's shoulder. "If it's a girl," Matthew suggested, "what about naming her after your mother?" Eleanor's heart warmed at his thoughtfulness. "Sarah," she said softly. "Sarah Tucker, it's beautiful." "And if it's a boy," Eleanor considered for a moment, "John, after my father, he would have liked you, you know. Would have approved of us." Matthew nodded, clearly touched. "John Tucker. A fine name for a future rancher, or doctor, or lawyer, or whatever they want to be," Eleanor added. Absolutely, Matthew agreed. Our child will have choices we never did. As night fell completely, they reluctantly rose to go inside. Matthew wrapped an arm around Eleanor's waist as they walked toward the warm light spilling from their home's windows. You know, he said thoughtfully, I came to Montana looking for a fresh start, never imagining I'd find everything I ever wanted. Eleanor leaned into his embrace. Sometimes the best things in life are the ones we never saw coming. Like a stubborn woman determined to save her ranch. Matthew teased. Like a drifting cowboy who believed in her when no one else would, Eleanor countered with a smile. Together, they stepped across the threshold of their home, leaving behind the doubts and struggles of the past and walking confidently into a future they would shape together, a future built on love, respect, and the unshakable belief that with each other they would always be more than enough. The years passed, bringing both joys and challenges to the Porter and Tucker Ranch. Eleanor gave birth to a healthy baby girl they named Sarah in the winter of 1883, followed 2 years later by a son, John, just as they had planned. By 1890, their family had grown to include another daughter, Grace, and the ranch had expanded to 3 times its original size. Prairie Rose had grown as well, from a dusty frontier town to a proper community with a school, church, and even a small library that Eleanor had helped establish. The railroad had arrived in 1888, bringing new opportunities for cattle shipping and making their annual drives less arduous. On a crisp autumn morning in 1895, Eleanor stood on a hillside overlooking their property, marveling at how much had changed in the 15 years since she'd inherited her father's struggling ranch. Below her, 12-year-old Sarah was helping Matthew mend a fence, showing the same determination that Eleanor had once demonstrated to a drifter who'd appeared when she needed him most. 10-year-old John was learning to rope from Jim Ralston, who had stayed on as foreman all these years. And little Grace, now 5, sat atop a gentle pony, being led around the yard by Joey, no longer a boy but a capable young man who managed their horse breeding program. "Penny for your thoughts," came Matthew's voice as he climbed the hill to join her. Gray now streaked his temples and lines of experience framed his eyes, but he was still the most handsome man Eleanor had ever known. "I was just thinking about how full our lives have become," she replied, accepting his kiss on her cheek. "Remember when they said I'd never be enough to save this ranch?" Matthew's arm slipped around her waist, a gesture as familiar and comforting as breathing. "I remember everything about those days," he said, "especially the moment I realized I'd found the woman I wanted to spend my life with." Eleanor leaned against him, watching as Sarah competently hammered a nail into the fence post. "Our children will never know what it's like to be told they can't do something because of who they are." "No," Matthew agreed. "They'll only know they can do anything with enough heart and hard work." "Like their parents," Eleanor said, smiling up at him. Matthew's blue eyes, still as clear and honest as the day they'd met, crinkled with happiness. "Like their remarkable mother, who taught a rootless cowboy how to build a life worth living." As they stood together on the hillside, watching their children and the legacy they'd created together, Eleanor felt a sense of completion, of rightness. The path hadn't always been easy, but every struggle had led them here, to this moment of perfect contentment. "I love you, Matthew Tucker," she said, the words no less powerful for having been spoken thousands of times over their years together. "And I love you, Eleanor Tucker," he replied, bringing her hand to his lips. "More today than yesterday and not as much as tomorrow." Hand in hand, they descended the hill toward their family and their home, secure in the knowledge that together, they had always been and would always be more than enough.